The quiet stillness of a late weekend evening in England rarely signals the onset of a historic institutional crisis. Yet beneath the surface of traditional grandeur, a silent storm is gathering strength within the most enduring corridors of power. For centuries, the public has been conditioned to view the ancient machinery of the state as a flawless monument of stability, an unyielding fortress where every public gesture, every official statement, and every grand ceremony is orchestrated with absolute precision and absolute unity. We are taught to believe that behind the high stone walls and security envelopes of our most treasured national symbols sits a singular, focused mind, operating with a grand strategy designed to preserve legacy above all else. But what happens when the illusion of that perfect facade begins to crack, revealing a chaotic meltdown that threatens to expose a profound administrative vulnerability at the very heart of the establishment? This weekend has provided what many seasoned observers are calling undeniable proof that the central apparatus of the crown is no longer speaking with one voice, but is instead locked in a fierce, deeply polarizing internal conflict. As we settle into the late hours of this Saturday, we invite you to journey with us into the hidden mechanics of this unfolding drama. And if you find value in these deep explorations behind the scenes of history in the making, please consider subscribing to our channel to stay informed as this complex narrative continues to unravel day by day. The signs of a fracturing consensus do not always manifest as loud, public declarations, but rather as subtle, discordant notes sounded in the pages of the Sunday press, where competing factions have begun an unprecedented briefing war that is rapidly spinning out of administrative control. To the untrained eye, the headlines might look like the standard, familiar cycle of speculation, a recurring pattern of personal drama and familial tension that has played out across the airwaves for generations. However, a closer reading of the latest disclosures reveals something far more systemic and far more damaging than a mere disagreement over schedules or domestic arrangements. In an extraordinary breakdown of traditional media discipline, palace sources are now openly undermining one another within the exact same publications, offering wild, contradictory accounts that cancel each other out in real time. One channel fills the morning broadsheets with urgent warnings of emotional blackmail and sophisticated psychological manipulation, portraying the leadership as a vulnerable target of external pressures. Simultaneously, a parallel brief from the very same offices insists that there is nothing but goodwill, a deep desire for domestic reconciliation, and an eagerness to open the doors to long-absent relatives. A third, colder voice enters the fray to abruptly state that no official meetings are even written into the diary, creating a dizzying, self-defeating spiral of misinformation that leaves the public wondering who is truly running the machine. This bizarre, conflicting messaging is not the result of simple administrative oversight or casual incompetence, though it would certainly be easy to dismiss it as a mere comedy of errors from an exhausted public relations department. The reality is infinitely more serious, rooted in a deep historical factionalism that has quietly divided the highest offices of the land into two fundamentally irreconcilable ideological camps. To understand why the public narrative has become so thoroughly fractured, one must look past the superficial details of who is traveling where, and instead examine the silent, bitter warfare being waged between the institutional doves and the institutional hawks. On one side stands a philosophy of peace at all costs, a deep-seated belief in reconciliation and the absolute necessity of projecting a united, all-forgiving front to the world, regardless of past betrayals or public outcries. Arrayed against this gentle approach is a much sterner, unyielding faction that views any compromise as an existential threat to the long-term survival of the institution itself, arguing that actions must have permanent consequences and that the gates, once closed, must remain firmly shut. This ideological rift is no longer a closely guarded secret discussed only in whispered conversations behind heavy oak doors. It has burst into the open, transforming the national media into a battleground where seasoned courtiers are actively fighting to control the ultimate narrative of the reign. As the clock ticks closer to midnight, the atmosphere grows heavy with the realization that an impending summer arrival is acting as the ultimate catalyst for this structural explosion. For months, there were those who believed this entire dilemma was nothing more than public relations, posturing, a superficial cloud of digital noise that would dissolve the moment practical realities intervened. Yet, as the logistical machinery grinds into motion, it has become blindingly clear that a profound shift is occurring, made possible by a quiet, highly controversial intervention from the very top of the hierarchy. By extending an extraordinary olive branch in the form of prestigious lodgings and a comprehensive security solution, the leadership has inadvertently set off a chain reaction of internal fury that is currently tearing through the administrative staff. The hawks are alarmed because they recognize that this is not an isolated 5-day visit, but the laying of a permanent infrastructure, a dangerous precedent that will alter the balance of power for decades to come. The stage is now set for a confrontation that goes far deeper than a family reunion, touching upon the very definition of duty, accountability, and the future survival of an ancient legacy. As the two factions prepare for a definitive clash that will either mend the great fracture or break the machinery of the crown beyond repair, the deep, internal division that is currently paralyzing the highest offices of the land cannot be understood as a vague or abstract ideological debate, for it has concrete names, faces, and powerful figures working behind the scenes to steer the course of history. To fully grasp the sheer scale of the tension currently mounting in the capital, one must look directly at the specific individuals who command these warring factions within the palace hierarchy. At the absolute center of the hawkish resistance is a formidable old-fashioned courtier who has spent decades mastering the intricate bureaucratic levers of the state machinery, Sir Clive Alderton. As the principal private secretary, he is far more than a mere scheduler or administrative assistant. He is the ultimate gatekeeper, the guardian of the diary, and the man who effectively controls access to the seat of power itself. Operating with a philosophy reminiscent of the classic iron-willed civil servants of the past, he views himself as the true protector of the institution's long-term dignity and survival. In his view, the highly controversial, disruptive behavior exhibited by the overseas branch of the family over the past several years is not something that can simply be washed away with a polite handshake or a cup of tea. He firmly believes that providing a smooth, consequence-free path back into the institutional fold would cause a catastrophic permanent erosion of public trust. Signaling to the world that duty can be discarded and reclaimed at will, the depth of the animosity surrounding this key figure is well documented and intensely personal, serving as a bitter undercurrent to the current public relations crisis. In widely read memoirs that sent shockwaves through the global media landscape, the self-exiled prince spared no effort in targeting this specific official, famously branding him with the derisive nickname of the Wasp. In those highly descriptive pages, the courtier was portrayed as a member of an elite, shadowy trio of bureaucratic insiders, colorfully described alongside colleagues as the bee and the fly, who allegedly worked tirelessly behind the scenes to dismantle the prince's relationship with his father. For years, the overseas faction has viewed this powerful administrator as the ultimate personification of the cold, calculating men in gray suits who run the system with an agenda designed to isolate and undermine nonconformists. Whether one views these intense suspicions as a legitimate critique of an unyielding system or as a deeply paranoid misreading of standard administrative duty is entirely a matter of perspective. But the undeniable fact remains that this powerful bureaucratic force is actively and aggressively opposed to any form of institutional rehabilitation. Alleging perfectly with this rigid protective stance is the immediate heir to the position of ultimate authority, whose lean, highly disciplined household operates with a radically different philosophy than the sprawling traditional office of his father. Though his staff is easily a tenth of the size of the central palace operation, it is managed with an intensely focused, modern efficiency that remains hyper-attuned to public opinion and digital sentiment. This smaller, agile team prides itself on ironclad media discipline, ensuring that no internal gossip or contradictory messaging ever leaks out to confuse the public or undermine the appearance of stability. While the heir's team is far too loyal and strategically astute to ever issue a public statement that openly contradicts the current leadership, Their private actions and long-term positioning speak absolute volumes. The public has watched closely as the heir has consistently demonstrated a firm, uncompromising approach to institutional discipline, drawing a sharp, unmistakable contrast with his father's more lenient instincts. Whenever the controversial overseas brother schedules an unexpected arrival on domestic soil, the heir conspicuously removes himself from the vicinity, traveling to the furthest corners of the kingdom to ensure that there is absolutely no opportunity for an accidental encounter or a forced photographic reconciliation. This stark, unyielding strategy is deeply rooted in the heir's own personal history and the profound, enduring memories of a highly tumultuous childhood defined by public marital strife and institutional vulnerability. For those who understand the inner workings of the family dynamics, it is no secret that a quiet, lingering tension has often existed between the father and the son regarding the best way to safeguard the future of their ancient legacy. While the older generation is frequently guided by an emotional, ancestral impulse to keep the family unit intact at all costs, the younger leader is entirely focused on a survival strategy driven by modern realities, cold metrics, and public polling. He and his advisors read the statistical data carefully, and they are fully aware that the overwhelming majority of the domestic population has absolutely no desire to see self-exiled individuals re-platformed or restored to positions of national prestige after years of public hostility. This fundamental divergence in worldview has turned the upcoming July visit into an absolute minefield, as the hawkish faction watches with growing horror while the soft, conciliatory instincts of the central office threaten to undo years of careful damage control. Directly opposing this ironclad defensive line is the faction of the Doves, a group that operates with an entirely different vision for the future, led by Sir Clive Alderton's own ambitious deputy, Theo Rycroft. A seasoned former diplomat with a background deeply rooted in international negotiation and political compromise, he is widely expected to step into the role of principal private secretary in the fullness of time. Unlike his traditional unbending superior, this strategic operator views his primary function not as an independent guardian of ancient rules, but as an enabler designed to smoothly facilitate and execute the personal wishes and okozosh instincts of the current leader. He is completely, seamlessly aligned with the leader's deeply held personal philosophy, an approach driven by a strong desire for ultimate reconciliation, familial peace, and an eagerness to let bygones be bygones. This dovish camp strongly believes that the long-term health of the institution is best served by presenting a picture of a completely unified, harmonious clan, desperately clinging to the classic comforting myth of the perfect model family. This powerful, forgiving impulse is a defining characteristic of the current leader's character, a deeply ingrained psychological pattern that has consistently shaped his administrative decisions since his ascent to power. The public has seen this exact same narrative play out before, most notably during the first 3 years of the current reign, when the leader expended an immense amount of personal and political capital attempting to quietly rehabilitate his highly controversial, disgraced brother. Despite immense public blowback and a barrage of negative media coverage, the leader consistently resisted the mounting pressures to completely sever ties, repeatedly inviting the problematic relative to high-profile holiday gatherings, family events, and private retreats. It was only when faced with an absolute unyielding wall of resistance from the younger heir that the leader was finally reluctantly forced to take decisive action and remove the individual from official public life. Now that very same battle line has been redrawn over the impending arrival of the overseas son, creating an administrative crisis where the two most powerful offices in the kingdom are openly at war with one another through the chaotic mediums of the national press, making the entire establishment look deeply unstable. The true danger of the impending July visit does not lie in the brief flurry of media speculation that will inevitably surround a few days of private meetings and domestic travel, but rather in the profound, irreversible structural precedent that this highly controversial arrangement sets for the ultimate future of the crown. For months, casual observers of the institutional drama have treated the unfolding event as a contained, isolated occurrence, focusing entirely on superficial questions of personal fashion, logistics, and family dynamics. The reality, however, is that this upcoming trip represents the initial crucial phase of a highly sophisticated long-term strategy designed to completely reabsorb the overseas faction back into the prestigious core of the establishment. This is not a casual vacation or a simple, spontaneous family reunion. It is a meticulously constructed blueprint, a permanent standing pattern, and a complex administrative infrastructure that will alter the institutional landscape for a generation. By securing the keys to a grand official residence and establishing a fully state-sanctioned security envelope, the self-exiled couple has effectively resolved the massive logistical obstacles that they spent years claiming were entirely insuperable. Once this precedent is established on domestic soil, it becomes a permanent right that can be invoked whenever they wish to return, making it virtually impossible for any future leadership to dismantle without igniting an entirely new round of public victimhood and prolonged international hostility. The long-term strategy behind this sudden, aggressive push for domestic rehabilitation is deeply tied to the commercial realities and fading global influence of the overseas brand. After a series of highly publicized professional setbacks and the quiet expiration of massive multi-million-dollar international entertainment contracts, the California-based couple has come to a stark, unavoidable realization about the true nature of their global marketability. Every piece of independent media production, commercial venture, or lifestyle branding that they have launched has only achieved significant financial success when it was directly linked to their proximity to the ancient, prestigious institution of the Crown. Stripped of that majestic association, their independent ventures have repeatedly struggled to maintain public interest in a crowded, hyper-competitive global market. Returning to the United Kingdom and being seen entering the historic gates of an official royal palace provides them with the ultimate corporate revalidation, a priceless patina of genuine institutional status that can be instantly monetized across international platforms. Plans are already underway to utilize this high-profile visit as a direct marketing opportunity, with explicit indications that the specific apparel and luxury items worn during the trip will be immediately available to global consumers via affiliate digital networks. This is the ultimate realization of the highly controversial half-in, half-out model of public life that the previous leadership fought so fiercely to prevent. Now fully enabled and facilitated by the current administration, the tragic irony of the current situation is that the central office is actively engaging in a self-defeating, deeply cynical public relations campaign that portrays the leader as a weak, easily manipulated figure in order to shield him from the intense public backlash surrounding his decisions. By briefing the national press that the leader has been emotionally blackmailed, bounced, and tricked into providing these extraordinary privileges, the hawkish courtiers are desperately trying to rewrite the narrative before the couple even arrives on domestic soil. This elaborate framing is entirely unconvincing to anyone who understands the rigorous absolute control that the leader maintains over his own official resources and private properties. A historic residence cannot be handed over, and complex national security protocols cannot be quietly rearranged without the complete active cooperation and explicit authorization of the person sitting at the very top of the hierarchy. The leader's actions are driven by a deeply ingrained personal impulse toward absolute familial unity, combined with a profound, quiet awareness of his own ongoing health battles, creating a powerful sense of urgency that time is rapidly running out to mend the historic fractures within his lineage. Yet, by allowing his personal desires as a grandfather to completely override his supreme duties as a monarch, he is committing a monumental strategic error that threatens to permanently alienate the very public that funds the institution. The devastating consequences of this profound lack of strategic direction are already manifesting in a historic, unprecedented collapse of public support for the ancient institution as a whole. A groundbreaking, comprehensive national poll published this very weekend has revealed that overall public approval for the continuity of the state machinery has plummeted to its lowest level in over 30 consecutive years, dropping to a mere 55%. This represents a staggering, catastrophic decline of 11 full percentage points in just a short 3-year window, directly coinciding with the current leader's chaotic, deeply inconsistent management of major institutional crises. The public is not blind to the glaring contradictions playing out within the administration. They watched with growing frustration as the leader spent years attempting to quietly shelter and rehabilitate his disgraced brother. And they are now watching him repeat the exact same pattern of leniency with his estranged overseas son. In sharp, undeniable contrast to this rapid erosion of authority, the immediate heir to the throne has seen his personal approval ratings soar to an impressive 71%, creating an immense, highly significant 11-point gulf between the two generations of leadership. This massive statistical divide demonstrates that the general population deeply respects and prefers the heir's firm, consistent, and uncompromising approach to institutional discipline, recognizing that actions must have permanent, unyielding consequences if the dignity of the state is to be preserved. As the shadow of this institutional crisis lengthens, the immediate heir finds himself in an incredibly difficult, deeply unfair position. Facing the bleak prospect of inheriting a thoroughly compromised legacy burdened by a permanent, disruptive external presence, the younger leader recognizes that his father's conciliatory actions are effectively bequeathing him a highly toxic, unstable situation, forcing him into a future choice between quietly accepting the commercial exploitation of the crown or launching a grueling, exhausting public campaign to evict the overseas faction all over again. The intense alarm currently rippling through the hawkish faction of courtiers stems from the clear realization that the upcoming July visit is the definitive turning point, a moment where the ancient fortress is voluntarily opening its gates to those who spent years trying to dismantle its walls from afar. The legacy media remains largely silent on the true depth of this existential crisis, terrified of losing their precious, highly restricted access to the inner circles of power if they dare to voice a genuine, unvarnished critique of the leader's strategic blunders. Yet, beneath the superficial assurances of unity and the polished public relations statements, the ancient machinery of the crown is currently locked in its most dangerous internal conflict of the modern era, spinning rapidly out of control as two entirely different visions for the future of the realm prepare for a final catastrophic collision.